Hi, I'm Eran Dilger for RoughDrafted magazine on video. This is the 10 Myths of iPad, and the 9th installment is looking at, can the iPad multitask? No, Apple didn't design the iPhone OS without multitasking capabilities. The iPhone OS inside the iPad uses the same preemptively multitasking kernel as the desktop version of Mac OS X. The iPhone OS is constantly running processes in the background, listening for network connections, incoming texts, being able to play music in the background and other applications. So it's constantly doing multiple things at once. This is the definition of multitasking. A preemptively multitasking operating system has multiple tasks scheduled to run at once on the same processor. This is managed by the kernel, so if an application doesn't stop when it's supposed to, the kernel stops it. In many cases, the iPhone is also multiprocessing, meaning that it's running different tasks on different processor cores. A single tasking operating system is one where the system only runs one application at a time ever. This was the case with the original 1984 Macintosh and with the original Palm Pilot. The reason both used a single tasking model was because both of them had constraints in terms of processor and memory. For similar finite resource reasons, the iPhone OS, while it is a preemptively multitasking system, arbitrarily limits third-party applications from installing themselves in the background or continuing to run after the user quits them. Most of the people who are talking about multitasking in the context of the iPhone have in mind something else. They're usually talking about app concurrency, but covering over a number of subjects using the same word really isn't useful. What they really mean to say is that the iPhone OS isn't designed to run multiple applications at once in its security model. That's impossible to do without jailbreaking it. How does this aspect of multitasking, of concurrently running different applications at once in the user space, how well does it work in a mobile environment? Well, it depends upon the implementation. Various multitasking models are not the same, so referring to multitasking as if it's a blanket bullet point is simply misleading. Microsoft proved what a bad idea it was to allow users to launch a whole bunch of apps on top of each other in Windows Mobile. Each application is launched as a full screen window. Additionally, closing a window doesn't necessarily close the application. You end up with a whole bunch of applications that are stacked on top of each other, so the user can't really interact between them. So it's multitasking in name only. In many ways, Palm's simpler Palm OS was better because it made better use of the battery, it presented a simpler model to users that was easier to understand, and it didn't really not do anything that people wanted it to do. Google's Android copies Windows Mobile in some respects in giving users just kind of full access to be able to run a bunch of applications in the background. This has some benefits related to it, but it also brings a lot of problems. And people who are talking about multitasking kind of gloss over what those problems are, like battery lifetime forces users to kind of manage their own processes and try to kill processes that are in the background that they don't want running. And it also opens up security problems related to applications that install themselves in the background or do things in the background that users aren't even aware of. On the iPhone, when the user pushes the home button, the current application has to stop. Anyone who complains that the iPhone or the iPad doesn't multitask is either signaling that they don't understand what that word really means, or that they're trying to muddy the waters to make sure that other people don't understand it. When Palm developed the original operating system of the Palm Pilot 15 years ago, it licensed an operating system kernel from a third-party developer in a single tasking configuration. This meant that the Palm OS simply could not run multiple applications at once. In contrast, Apple's iPhone was developed specifically from a starting point that used a preemptively multitasking kernel. On top of this operating system, Apple built a third-party development sandbox that runs each app one at a time. This simply prevents applications from running in the background whether they are trying to do something useful or whether they're trying to do something malicious. The only way multiple concurrent applications can be run on the iPhone or the iPad is to jailbreak it, which breaks the kernel security system and allows users to launch as many apps as they want. This creates a system that's closer to the desktop environment of Mac OS X or Windows. But this also introduces the same problems of those desktop operating systems in terms of malware and viruses and spyware. The iPhone doesn't have those problems because there's no way to install that type of malware on it in the background. The Mac desktop is largely protected from malware problems because in order to install background processes, a user has to authenticate as an admin user. Additionally, if there's some sort of malware user installs accidentally, it's pretty easy to uninstall any applications and clean up any problems that are there. On the Windows desktop, it's not only easier to install things without realizing that you're doing it, but it's also much more difficult to clean out problems once they've been installed. This is largely a problem due to the Windows registry. Forcing users to manage their security in a mobile environment makes even less sense. Without the vigilant security model in the iPhone OS, background applications could do things like spam in your name or at your own expense using SMS. It could also use GPS to report your information of where you're at to a malicious follower. Additionally, it could expose your personal contacts, calendar, and other information to another user. So the risks involved in a mobile environment are actually greater than a desktop environment. In developing the iPhone and the iPad, Apple looked at what users really want to be able to do and what they don't want to have to do. In contrast, Microsoft and Google have essentially taken the desktop environment and brought it to a mobile device without really rethinking anything. That's created an illusion of greater utility, while at the same time bringing in issues related to security and usability and management complexity that don't really need to be there in the mobile environment. Most mobile users are not only unaware of this, but they also lack the security credentials to adequately manage this on their own. And they shouldn't need to. The issues that we didn't address on the PC desktop resulted in a multi-billion-dollar problem in terms of spyware and adware and viruses. And while it doesn't do much good to think about those things in retrospect, we do have to think about what we're going to have on the future in the mobile desktop. Apple seems to get this, and Microsoft and Google don't. While Apple's mobile-optimized iPhone app model makes a lot more sense for users than Microsoft's attempt to just dump the PC desktop on mobile devices, there are some exceptions that the iPhone's model originally didn't anticipate. The first and most prominent is that applications working on the iPhone, a lot of them have some reason to stay alive to listen for incoming updates or news or requests for their attention from an outside service. Apple accommodated this in the notification platform, which allows developers to work with Apple's server so that the operating system on the mobile device itself can listen for incoming updates and then simply badge those applications so they don't have to be running. The user can then respond to either the badge or a pop-up indication that some new notification has come in and open the app themselves. This allows apps to respond to external information without having to sit in the background listening and at the same time consuming memory and processor time. There are two other reasons why applications might want to have an exception to Apple's app model. One is to provide a background local service on the phone that does something, for example, play music like Pandora. Another example is something that wants to interact with an outside service and publish new information instead of just receiving it. That can't be done with notifications. It's widely expected that Apple's iPhone 4.0 will accommodate the ability to run specific applications in the background. Even if that doesn't happen, there's a variety of things Apple could do to accommodate users' needs. One of those things is to take a service that people want to be able to do, for example, Pandora being able to listen to internet radio in the background, and include that into the iPod app itself, so that third-party applications can present their own user interface and tell a background process to do some sort of task, like listen to music in the background. That way, when the user quits the application, the background task continues to play it. A variety of the few other needs for multitasking could similarly be rolled into the operating system so that the system itself is performing those instead of third-party apps. And the other benefit to that is that allows the kernel to be aware of what's going on and to manage resources as needed instead of just giving applications all the resources that they demand and kind of stealing that from the foreground application. So what about the blazing fast iPad? Well, when I was using it, I didn't have any immediate sort of feeling that I needed to run multiple applications at once. Being able to immediately quit an app and then relaunch another app quickly allows you to go back and forth between apps to, for example, copy and paste data. So the idea of needing to do desktop-style multitasking on the device just because it's a bigger screen doesn't necessarily hold up. If Apple had made a bunch of easy kind of populist decisions to please pundits first, it would have resulted in the iPhone and iPad inheriting a lot of the same problems as Windows Mobile and Android. As it is, customers now have a choice. So that's segment 9 of my 10 myths of iPad. Look for me on Twitter at Daniel Eran, and I'm on Facebook on the Roughly Drafted page. And of course, my website is roughlydrafted.com, so come and leave your comments and opinions.